Good morning, everyone. So it has been a while, but still, welcome back to the Jarak class, and this is Miss Dian. As it has been said that the diary class this time is a little different because you guys are not required to write about your weekend or things. However, in this time, you are required to make a fiction story, your own story. So you gotta go and explore with your own imaginations to make a story. Let's find out how to write and make story as the beginner. Here we go.
Hey, it's story time! Hello, little J.K. Rowling. Yes, J.K. Rowling. If you don't know her yet, I'm sure that you must know her masterpiece. Yeah, she's the writer behind the most famous and phenomenal series of Harry Potter book that has been adapted to become a blockbuster movie with the same title. So, why did we talk about it? Can we write a book too? The answer is, why not? These are two books called Bob the Superhero and The Secret Treasure that has been written by the earlier 6th graders for the last 2 years. And yep, it is also possible for you to make the same book. As the goals of this class is for you to write a fiction story, so you gotta start by deciding what kind of story you're going to write. What kind of story do you like? Here are 4 types of story that you can pick for your story. First, you can pick a story about science fiction, or sometimes shortened to sci-fi. This type of story that typically deals with imaginative and futuristic concepts such as advanced science and technology, space exploration, or time travel. Second is a fairy tale. The fantastical characters found in a fairy tale include elves, fairies, witches, and dragons. Next up is one of the most favorite type of the story among children also, which is horror and mystery story. And the last, if you're an adventurous type of person, you may write an adventure story, where you can find it also in the famous Harry Potter book and also Peter Pan. Now, here I have some prompts of writing that could be the ideas you can look up to make the story of your own. You can pause this video if you want to read them carefully. I gave for all 4 types of the story. So, now let's find out what should we write in our story. But let's just simplify it to these 3 stages of story. First, you start your story by writing an opening to engage the reader to read more and more to the next part of the story. Next up, you should come up with a problem or conflict. This conflict is usually reflected in the title of your story. And then finally, you should close your story by writing an ending that will answer the conflict. Now, why wouldn't we find out more detail about the 3 stages? Here we go. Well, do you like eating ice cream? If you are to choose 2 ice creams, are you going to pick a delightful looking ice cream or a flat looking ice cream? I'm sure you will pick the first one, because first impression is somehow important. Just like writing stories, an opening will be the first impression of your story, so make as interesting as it could be. Here are 5 strategies that you could apply to your story. First, you may begin your story with action or dialogue from the characters. Or else, you also can start by asking a question. Maybe it's something like, why does trouble always follow me around? Do I have a kick me sign on my back or something? That will make your reader to be curious and want to find out the answer, so they read more to the next part of your story. And then next up, you also can start your story by describing the settings in your story, either about the place or time, so the reader could imagine the exact situation that you over in your story. The last one, you also may begin your story by having the main character introducing himself or herself. Here is an example of an opening that is written by Kayla. It's taken from the Secret Treasure book. Let's just read this. It was Saturday. The weather was perfect. Everything was perfect for Isabella. She was wandering off the neighborhood like usual. It had been 20 minutes since Isabella was walking. She then found an old-looking house. She went in since she thought it was interesting. In this opening, you can see that the writer introduced or described how the day is like. Instead of starting with once upon a time or one day that looks too old, she started with mentioning the day. It was Saturday. And she also described that the weather was perfect. The next example of an opening is written by Rayhan. It was a gloomy day, and soon heavy rain with thunder making things got more miserable. A detective came to the village. He came to one house and took off his raincoat. "Come on, Noir. We've been waiting for you," welcomed an old man inside the house. The old man told him that this village had been attacked by the villains. The detective read the data that the old man handed him and frowned. "We believe in you to save us," said the old man. That was it. Again, here the writer is describing the day. It's describing the setting. He says it not with once upon a time again, but with it was a gloomy day. And soon heavy rain with thunder making things got more miserable. Can you imagine exactly how the situation is like in the story? Because I do. That is one of a good opening for a story. Because you can also put details to your story. Look at the line where the writer says, "He came to one house and took off his raincoat." I, as the reader, can imagine that the detective took off his raincoat because the writer tells us so. And then next, after the opening, you gotta come up with a problem or conflict, right? Here, I will introduce you to 4 types of conflict. The first type is a conflict between person and person. This is one of the most common conflicts in stories. It's, for example, maybe a conflict between friends or a conflict between a boy and a bad guy or else. And then the next one, you also can make a conflict between person versus nature. For example, when you are making a story about natural disaster, specifically the main character or the person facing the natural disaster, right? And then the third one, you also can make a conflict between person versus supernatural. This usually found in a horror or mystery story. And then the last one, You also may make conflict between person versus technology. Obviously, this would be found mostly in a sci-fi story. Now, I am going to give you also an example about the conflict. It's written by Josephina. Let's read it together. We walked more and more, deep with no fear. After walking for hours, luckily we found a place to stay for a night here in the middle of the wood. While Annie and I were preparing to cook for dinner, Daniel and Noah were searching for some wood to set the fire. But something went wrong. It had been hours, but the boys were not coming back yet. I and Annie started to feel worried. I asked Annie, "Annie, where are they going?" That is an example of a conflict. In the opening, it must be told why are they in the middle of the wood. But the most important here is that the writer told us that something went wrong. It is a conflict. We exactly know that the boys were not coming back yet. Did they get lost? The last one, you gotta close your story by writing an ending. Your ending should answer the conflict. Let's go to an example of an ending. As they were ready to go, they saw James stood right in front of them. They looked at James, still couldn't believe what he had done to them. They all were frozen in silence. "I really apologize to the both of you," James broke the silence. "Why would you come back? Don't you want to own this treasure? Just for you?" Finn held his anger. "Well, don't you bring the treasure with you, James?" Jake wondered. "I did. I went to the cave, and I saw a treasure box inside the cave. I walked towards the treasure box, so I opened the box and I found this." James gave a piece of very thick and old paper to Finn and Jake. "Friendship is the best treasure you could ever have," said Finn and Jake, reading the line on the paper. They hugged each other as best friends. It is quite clear that the writer here ends his story by making one of the characters, which is James, to apologize to the other characters. Also, as it has been said in the last line, which says, "They hugged each other as best friends," the writer makes us understand that when the characters hugged each other at the end, it must be that they are forgiving each other. So that is the end of the story. Now, are you ready to make your own story? Before you go with writing a story, you better start by making the frame of your story first. You can decide the title of your story and then decide who are going to be in the story, which is the characters. Also decide the settings. You can set both place and time. And then decide the conflicts. And then also, how do you overcome the conflicts or the solution of the conflicts? And then the last, you could write how the ending will be like. So, that is all. Thanks everyone, and good luck with your own stories.